many of you ever saw that scene with Roy Mustang, by the way, spoilers, and Lust? This is arguably one of the best anime scenes ever, in which we saw Roy go snaptastic all over this lady and completely burn her to a crisp. Bungie's essentially allowed us to become Roy Mustang, but in Destiny. And today, guys, we're going to show you how to accomplish that. First, big shout out to Eagle of Death for pointing out this build to me. And just about every new season, we start off with a Titan build, but fellas, this is a beautiful sight to behold. Going from location to location and simply snapping your fingers and watching everything in front of you die. What's even crazier is that this build is only going to get better even in-game content like Grandmaster Nightfalls. So first, we're going to go over everything we are using, starting with our subclass. We're actually taking advantage of Well of Radiance, Phoenix Dive, Incendairy Snap, which is that new melee ability, which states that you snap your fingers to create a fan of burning sparks that explode and scorch targets. And again, scorching is when you actually singe or begin to burn a target. And as they take damage over time and they reach 100 scorch stacks, they will then ignite. And that ignition is that large solar explosion that you see. And not everything applies scorch, so therefore not everything will grant you that ignite solar explosion. But this is a very nice explosion. Now the grenade choice is kind of up in the air for me still, and we're going to talk about that a little more when we get to our mods. But the aspects, we have Heat Rises. Now Heat Rises allows you to fire your weapons, melee, and throw grenades while you are gliding. Now when you actually hold and activate Heat Rises, it consumes your grenade. But notice here at the bottom it says that Final Blows while airborne increases the duration of Heat Rises and grants melee energy. This was such a key point in this note. It simply says Final Blows while you are airborne, not Final Blows while you have Heat Rises. Final Blows while simply airborne grants melee energy. Long story short, guys, every time we snap our melee and our booty is in the air, this solar aspect is applying, thus giving us back more melee energy. Now we're also combining this with Touch of Flame. Now Touch of Flame allows your healing solar firebolt and fusion grenades to have enhanced functionality. This also improves the strength of healing. Solar grenades have increased duration. Firebolt grenades have increased target search radius, and fusion grenades actually explode twice. Now the fragments that we're taking advantage of is Ember of Torches. It states that power melee attacks against combatants make you and nearby allies radiant. Now radiance enhances your weapons, allowing you to deal 25% more damage. Ember of Blistering, defeating targets with solar ignitions grants grenade energy. And considering we're popping this melee over and over again, solar ignitions is not a hard thing to get. We also have Ember of Ashes, where you can apply more scorch stacks to targets, thus allowing you to reach that ignition more often. And then Ember of Searing, where defeating scorched targets grants melee energy. Fellas, are you seeing the synergy? Now breaking over to our actual Guardian and what we're using, the mods that you're going to want to get, and again, a dim link of this will be down below, is Explosive Wellmaker. Again, defeating combatants with an explosive damage spawns solar elemental well. This is not a difficult thing to do here with our melee abilities. We're also taking advantage of Elemental Charge, where we become charged with light when we pick up these elemental wells. We're also using Melee Wellmaker, where power melee combatant Final Blows will spawn elemental wells matching our subclass energy type. And I'm also using Seeking Wells, which allows for those elemental wells to track to me and I don't have to pick it up. And again, a beautiful thing about those elemental wells is each one you're picking up is granting you ability energy. So it's essentially passively giving you extra energy there. Now we're also taking advantage of the Charge with Light mod Heavy Handed. While Charged with Light, you regain half of your melee energy when you use a charged melee ability, consuming 1 stack of Charged with Light. I think you're starting to see the synergy here, guys. Every time we cast our melee while Charged with Light, we're essentially getting it almost right back. I'm also taking advantage of Invigoration, which reduces melee cooldown each time you pick up an Orb of Power. Now, Explosive Wellmaker can actually be procced in a variety of ways. Again, just defeating combatants with explosive damage can spawn a solar elemental well. I'm actually taking advantage of the Scout Rifle Skyburner's Oath, which has actually been reworked here in a lot of different ways, and it's doing pretty damn good now. First up, the weapon is shooting 150 rounds per minute, whether you're aiming down sights or firing from the hip. And the Slug Rifle trait actually states that the weapon lobs these explosive slugs. And when you're aiming down sights, the slugs travel fast and straight. And when you're firing from the hip, the explosion is larger and applies scorch to the target. You can actually get max scorch stacks by just shooting Skyburner's Oath and get that ignition. Now, I think it's only like 5 stacks of scorch per shot, so it's going to take a hot minute. But the reason why I like this so much is that sometimes whenever I pop my melee, even though it has those 5 tracking balls, sometimes they spread out a little too much and they hit other targets and I don't get all of them on that single target. That's where Skyburner's Oath here comes into play. It allows me to tack on a few more shots onto that target, granting me those max stacks of scorch to get that big whopping ignition explosion. And again, we want that explosion as often as possible because it is a lot of damage. Now, if you want to trade some mods out to really help you here, you can rock mods like Impact Induction, which is uses a solar-based mod, which states that causing damage with your melee attack reduces your grenade cooldown, especially if you're looking to combine this with certain grenades, like solar grenades, incinerating grenades, which, by the way, gives a lot of scorch stacks. I think it actually gives the most scorch stacks. I was just taking advantage of firebolt grenades simply because I was using it to get heat rises, because if you take advantage of heat rises, when you Phoenix dive, this too applies scorch stacks to the target that you land on. And again, the goal here is for me to constantly be applying scorch stacks in some way to reach that ignition explosion. And if you want to just drop a well literally on a target's forehead, you can do that, which also scorches everything that you hit and nearby enemies. So there's a lot of synergy here that feeds into itself. And by the way, mods like Outreach and Distribution also proc when Phoenix diving. Now, we have a number of Warlock builds coming out that I'm very excited to try. Sun Bracers, Fell Winners, Dawn Chorus, etc. But the reason why I really like this build is actually because our artifact mods. We have a lot of artifact mods that are looking really, really good. First up, Withering Heat is back. Causing damage with a solar ability weakens champions for a short duration. This is a hefty debuff. What I like about this is, considering you have a tracking melee, literally snapping your finger and you can suddenly weaken that champion. And no lie, Withering Heat was one of the best mods we ever had. It just got overshadowed by other mods of that season. Now we also have Solar Fulmination, where your ignitions do increase damage in an increased radius. That is arguably the most exciting thing here. And for grenade-based builds, this is going to get even better with things like Molten Overload. Literally throwing a solar grenade will not only debuff a target, but apply scorch stacks, and your ignition will be a bigger explosion. So long story short, these last two columns here for this season on the artifact mods are very nasty, and it's going to work beautifully here with this build as well. The last thing I want to bring up is for single targets, I may actually look to use fusion grenades. One, it explodes twice when rocking Touch of Flame. So applying that to a champion will mean that the first explosion will debuff them with Withering Heat. The second explosion will do full damage. It will apply scorch stacks. And the beautiful thing about fusion grenades, Explosive Well Maker, which is the mod we're taking advantage of to provide us elemental wells, has a chance of spawning. So either way it goes, guys, this is a really good build. But what I'm trying to do is just show you that there is potential for this build even outside of this, even in-game PvE content. But I was extremely impressed with how it performed with the scorch stacks, with the snap finger combo, and on top of that, the power fantasy is amazing. Now, if you're looking to always make sure that your snaps are all going to a single target, you do want to be relatively close. Like, I'm thinking like 7 meters close. Anything outside of that, you'll notice like 1 or 2 of those track and melee balls will kind of like veer off to either side. So be relatively close, but for everything else, you're just raining hellfire with these snaps. And sometimes if I know I'm not going to be able to land all 5 of those melee balls, I'll preemptively get some Skyburner shots in and then follow up with the melee to get that ignition explosion. So guys, that is your Colonel Mustang build. By the way, if you have not watched Full Metal Alchemist, for the love of God, man, watch that show. One of the best animes ever. I never would have expected that we would actually be living this power fantasy inside of Destiny 2, but my God, is it amazing. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.